Welcome, everyone, to Journeys Through the Books of the Prophets. We are in the book of Shmuel Aleph, 1 Samuel. We're in the second chapter, and we're in the middle of the song of Chana. Chana, who was barren, who prayed in a very, very special manner to have a holy son, and she has Shmuel. And then she composed, we discussed this last week, even though we call it a song because it's one of the 10 archetypal songs sung through history, it actually begins by saying that Chana prayed. And if you remember, we learned that the gematria of prayer, tefillah, equals 515, which is the same as for shirah, for song. 515. And so here, even though it says that she prayed, we understand it that it's one of the archetypal songs. So last week, we went through the first 3 verses, and the song total has 10 verses. It's relatively short, but packed with meaning. And we're going to go finish the song and continue with the story in Shmuel Aleph. But last week, one of our participants, Toby, mentioned, just want to see if she's here right now. I hope she will come on. She mentioned that she remembers somehow paralleling the 10 verses of Chana's song with the 10 sefirot. And I promised that I would look into that. And when we finish going through the song, I'm going to go back and give you at least my opinion, my take on how we can arrange the song according to the 10 sefirot. Because anytime you have a model of 10, like the 10 commandments, the 10 plagues, the 10 tests of Avram, the 10 expressions through which the world is created, it always kind of begs to be corresponded to the 10 sefirot. I just got a message that my connection is unstable. So you should know if for any reason we get cut off, I will have to connect. I hope not, but just in case. Okay, so we're on the second chapter, the 4th verse. This is the 4th verse in the Song of Chana. It says, Keshed giborim chitim uvenichshalim azro chayil, that the armament, the bow of the strong ones, here it's meaning the enemies, is broken, and those that were in a weaker position, they have gained strength. So we mentioned last week that along with Chana praying and expressing her gratitude to God for granting her a child, a lot of the verses is a much more, I'll call it nationalistic. She has all of Israel in mind. That's why it's one of the archetypal songs. And so therefore, a number of the verses, including this one, is that she's praying that the strength of our enemies should be cut off, and that Israel, which many times is in a weaker position against its enemies, is strengthened. The 5th verse is Seveim belechem nishkaru, v'reivim chadalu, So here it says, those who are satisfied with bread, they will have to, in a certain way, like rent themselves out to be able to raise enough money to even buy bread. V're'evim chadlu, and those who were hungry, they will cease. They will now be fed. Ad akarat yelda shiva, until the one who is barren will give birth to 7. V'rabat banim umalala, and those who have many, many children, they will be weakened. Now, this most likely is said with the other wife of Elkanah. Elkanah had 2 wives, Chana and Penina. And we learned already that Penina was a little bit like Hagar, that she had many, many, many children. And she looked down on Chana because she felt like God is answering my prayers to have children. I must be on a higher level. And she, in a certain way, was arrogant with Chana. So there's a very good chance that the end of this verse has Penina in mind, that Chana is the akara. Chana is the barren one, but now she has a child, and hopefully tonight we're going to see that she had more children after this. We'll get to that. Shmuel wasn't her only child. Until then, Shmuel was her first. So again, we're going to go back on these verses and connect them to the sefirot. Now, the next 2, Vav and Zayin, the 6th and 7th verse, is Hashem me'mit u'mechayeh, morid Shaul v'Yael. That God causes death and he causes birth. He brings those down to the lower worlds, what we'll call Gehenna, and he raises them up. I'll come back to this in a minute, but I want to read the next verse because it's like a pair. Hashem morish uma'ashir. God makes someone poor or rich. Mashpil af miromam. He causes someone to be driven down, to be lessened, to be in a subservient situation. And he also raises people up. Now, last week, we went into actually great depth explaining the connection between this song and Rosh Hashanah. For those who are not here, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but the Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah is, wait, one second. It says that it's an unstable. I'm just hopefully fixing the possibility that this is an unstable connection. He's telling me to continue teaching, and that's what I'm going to do. So, because this song is the Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah, so if you remember, we learned that 3 women were remembered for children on Rosh Hashanah: Chana, Rachel, and Sarah. So that's one connection with Rosh Hashanah. And we also learned that God's name is mentioned 9 times in this song. And that is the secret of the 9 blessings of Musaf on Rosh Hashanah. It's really the only time of the year that we have 9 blessings in one of the standing prayers, the Amidah. And that is coming from the 9 mentions of God's name. And we also learn, without going back into it, that the number 9 is the secret of blowing shofar. And so now I want to add, because I'm going to repeat verses 6 and 7. Hashem me'mit u'mechaye, morid Shaul v'ya'al. Shaul v'ya'el. Yeah. That God causes death and he causes life. He brings a person down and he raises them up. And here specifically from the nether worlds, from what we call hell or Gehenna. And then the next verse is Hashem makes someone poor, makes someone rich. He causes someone to be lessened, and he raises them up. Now, there's a very deep connection here with Rosh Hashanah. In Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, which we already mentioned has a very deep connection with Chana, is the prayer called Unatana Tokef. The Kedusha Tayom, like this day is like no other day. There's a strength to this holiness of this day. And it's one of the pinnacle prayers of the whole year, and especially of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We say it in Yom Kippur also. And the main part of it is a whole series that is very similar to the song here of Chana. And this song comes before the later sages composed this song. In fact, this particular song, Unatana Tokef, comes much later, past the sages, but it has the same theme. And it begins, who is to live and who is to die? Who by fire and who by water? And it goes to a whole list, who in their time, who before their appointed time, who by flood and who by other catastrophe. So you might recognize that this was one of Leonard Cohen's very, very famous songs, one of many that was taken from his connection to being Jewish. He had a very, very deep connection to his Jewish tradition. And that song, who by fire and who by water, comes right from the prayer Unatana Tokef. And that prayer really is in a certain way based on the Song of Chana. These two verses that we just read here. So here we have an additional deep connection between the Song of Chana and the prayers of Rosh Hashanah and also Yom Kippur. The 8th verse is Mekim mi'afardal mi'ashpot yorim evyon, that God lifts someone up from the dust and the poor from the garbage heap. Lahoshiv im divim, so that they may sit with the nobles of the people. The kise kavod yin chalam, and the chair of honor they will inherit. Ki Lashem mitzakei eretz v'yashet aleihem tevel, that God establishes the foundations of the earth, and the whole world is supported by these foundations. So here again, we're going to see the tremendous influence of the Song of Chana, because the first part of this verse is actually repeated in one of the Tehillim and is part of Hallel. Hallel is this very, very joyous collection of psalms that we sing only on holidays. Rosh Chodesh, the 3 pilgrimage holidays, and Hanukkah. And so here again, the influence of this song is just tremendous. It's absolutely tremendous. The 9th verse is Raglei Chasidav Yishmor, the feet or the steps of his righteous ones he will guard. Roshaim b'choshech yidamu, and the evil ones will be compared to darkness. Ki lo b'koach yigaber ish, because a person is not saved really through only their own strength. Without God supporting them, our strength would be minimal. So here again, this verse is the inspiration for probably scores of verses in the Tehillim. This idea that God is with the righteous, and that the evil ones, even though they might seem to be prospering, eventually they will measure for measure. They will get their just rewards. And now we come to the last verse, and that is Hashem Yechatu Mirivov Alu b'shamayim yiram Hashem yadin avsei eretz, that Hashem cuts off his enemies, that he is elevated in the heavens, and his thunder roars and judges to the ends of the earth. Vayiten oz lemalko, he will give strength to his king. V'yarem kerem mishicho, and he will raise up the horn of his anointed one. So here, again, Chana is appealing to God and mentioning that God is with us, and he will cut off our enemies, and from heaven his judgments will go out, and he will give strength to his king and lift up the horn of salvation to his anointed one. So this is hinting to David and Mashiach. Shmuel, as we're going to see, anointed the first 2 kings of Israel. The first one was Shaul from the tribe of Binyamin. And unfortunately, that did not work out so well, as we will learn. And then he anointed David. And David had a blessing, a covenant with God, that all the kings in the future would come through David. And he was in a certain way, the first Mashiach, the first of the anointed one, even though Shaul was also anointed. But David himself refers to himself as the anointed one. Because obviously when he was anointed by Shmuel, it was a peak experience. Those stories we will get to in the book of Shmuel later on. So that's the song of Chana. But now what I want to do is go back, because I found that it was quite amazing to arrange these 10 verses to the 10 sefirot. Most of them are actually quite obvious. Some are a little bit less obvious, but it fits perfectly. It's not in order. Not every time you have, let's say, the 10 of this or 7 of that or 3 of that it always works out exactly that it's according to the sefirot in their order. But here, many of them are just quite obvious, and they even mention the name of the sefirot. So I'm going back to the first verse, and we're going to start from there. I'm not going to reread all of the verses for those who are following in their Tanakh. We're going back to the first verse of the second chapter, and it begins, V'titpalel Chana. Chana prayed. And she says, V'tomar alatz libi b'Hashem. My heart is uplifted in God. So here I put this as Bina, because it's a song from Chana, coming from the feminine side, that and prayer also is a feminine concept, and that her heart is lifted up, because in Petak de Eliyahu, a Kabbalistic track, part of the Zohar, so Bina is called Bina Liba, the understanding heart. And so here she begins her song by saying her heart is uplifted. So this is connected to Bina. I want to mention this is not written in stone. This is my own interpretation. Other people possibly could have other interpretations. I haven't seen anyone. It could be that someone, a commentary, did this already sometime during history. I'm not aware of it. So the first verse is Bina, and the second one is going to be Chachma, because Bina and Chachma always go together. Usually we'll have Chachma and then Bina. But here, because the song is coming from Chana, it seems natural to begin with Bina. So why is the second verse Chachma? Because it says, Ein kadosh kashem. There's no one holy like God. So in Kabbalah, holiness is always connected to Chachma. Purity is always connected to Bina. Kedusha and Tahara. Kedusha is Chachma. Tahara, purity, is connected to Bina. So this seems natural that this verse corresponds with Chachma. And the next verse is quite obvious that it's connected to Da'at, because it says, Kel Deot Hashem. God is a God of Deot, of knowledge. So this is an obvious connection to Dat. So here we have the first three, usually we would say, like Chabad, Chachma, Bina, and Dat. But here we see it's Bina, Chachma, and Dat. And I want to mention that many, many years ago, Rav Ginsburg taught for almost an entire year from the Tanya, and he showed that throughout the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe would explain things in triplets. He would give like 3 adjectives or 3 explanations of a concept. And Rav Ginsburg explained that we would think they'd all be Chachma, Bina, and Dat. And he showed each one that's not necessarily true. Sometimes it's Bina and then Chachma and Dat. Sometimes it's Dat, Bina, and Chachma. In other words, when you have 3 entities, you can permute them in 6 different ways. So here we have Bina, Chachma, and Dat, the first 3. The fourth one is obviously Gevura, because it says, Keshet Giborim Chatim, that the bow of the strong ones will be broken. So here it even mentions the same root as the sefira of Gevura. So that seems like an obvious one. I should mention here that I once learned the secret of making what are called these models from Rav Ginsburg. And he said that the way that it's done, again, sometimes it's in perfect order. And so it's just obvious. For example, we just had Tu B'Shvat, and there are 7 special fruits of Eretz Yisrael: wheat and barley, grapevine, fig, pomegranate, olive, and date, in that order. And they follow exactly Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. And each one of them is actually quite obvious. But many times you'll have 7 of something, and it's not in exact order. So Rav Ginsburg says the way you do it is you arrange the ones that are obvious first, and then the other ones will find their right place. So that's really how I did it here, because most of these are, to me at least, very obvious, their connection. And then there was 1 or 2 left over, and that fit in. Actually, there was only 1 that wasn't obvious to me. And that's the next one. The next one is the 5th verse. And that is Tiferet. This is a little less obvious, but in the same track, Petak de Eliyahu, that I mentioned before, that Bina is called Bina Liba, is the understanding heart. Tiferet is called Tiferet Gufa, Tiferet the body. Why? Because when you look at the sefirot, the sphere of Tiferet is in the middle. It's the middle of all 10, and it's really the middle of the lower 7. And so Petak de Eliyahu calls it the body, because it's the main connection. And remember, the sefirot are paralleled or correspond to the body. Chesed is the right arm, Gevura is the left arm, Tiferet is actually the heart, Netzach is the right leg, Hod is the left leg. It's like a body. Chachma and Bina Dad are up in the intellect, in the head. So this verse is talking about bread, that those who are satisfied will end up practically begging, and those who are hungry will end up satisfied. And so here the idea is we're talking about the body here. We're talking about just physical nourishment, physical energy and satisfaction. So that's Tiferet. That's the only one that I had to look deep to find the connection. The next one, the 6th verse, is Chesed. Is going to be, the next 2 are Netzach and Hod. Netzach and Hod always go together. They're a pair that just like Chachma and Bina go together, Netzach and Hod always go together. And these are the 2 that have the inspiration, as I mentioned before, for the prayer Unatana Tokef, who will live and who will die. And they go together. It's almost like one verse. God will cause death, and he will cause life again, to go down and to come up, to be poor, to be rich, to be humbled, and to be raised up. So these are Netzach and Hod. They always go together. The next one, the 9th one, is obviously Yesod, because the second part of the verse talks about the foundation, that God established the foundations of the earth. So that's an obvious one connected to Yesod. And then, excuse me, that was the 8th verse. I'm sorry. The 9th verse is going to be Chesed, because it mentions Chesed, Raglei Chasidav, the feet, the strides of his righteous, his Chasidim. So that's obviously connected to Chesed. And the last verse, the 10th verse, is obviously connected to Malchut, kingship, because it ends that God will give strength to his king, and he will lift up the horn of his anointed one. And the anointed one is David HaMelech, King David. So I'm hoping everyone is somewhat familiar with the sefirot. I couldn't really take time to go through all of the sefirot, but I want to thank Toby. I just want to see if Toby is here. If not, I will have to tell her that she really inspired me to go through this, and I found it very enlightening to see how the sefirot play themselves out in this archetypal song. And the sefirot are archetypal, and this song is archetypal, so that they're put together in a very, 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 very deep way. L'chaim, everyone, l'chaim. Okay, we are going to continue now in chapter 2. Okay, so in last class, we learned that after Shmuel was born, Elkanah, he was one of the leaders of the generation. Not only did he come up to Shilo, Shilo was where the Mishkan was 3 times a year. Later, when the temple would be built, all of Israel would come up to Jerusalem for the 3 pilgrimage holidays. But Elkanah would come with Chana and his children and Penina, but he would encourage everyone to come up to Shilo for those holidays. And we learned that after Shmuel was born, Chana said, I am not going to accompany you until I wean Shmuel. And we learned already that when he was 2 or 3, maybe even older, she brought him up and deposited him with Eli, because she had made a vow that if God grants her this holy son, that she will volunteer him to be raised in the Mishkan by the high priest, by Eli, and that he will serve God his whole life. So this is where the story continues, that Elkanah and Chana come up. He's weaned and he's already living with Eli. And so in the 11th verse, it says that V'yalech Elkanah haramata al beitov anar haya misharet et Hashem et pnei Eli HaKohen. Now, this is after they've deposited Shmuel. Now they're leaving. And it says that the youth, meaning Shmuel, so he served God, and he and the face of Eli the Kohen. So it's pointed out something very, very important. It says in the Gemara that, and we have to understand that in the olden days, even today, when one has a teacher, a rebbe, a rabbi, a rebbitzin, a mashpia, this is not a casual relationship. This is a relationship that, in principle, can last a lifetime. These are very, very deep connections. So here it says that that Shmuel served God, but he's also serving Eli. And it says in the Gemara, even more than learning from your teacher, it's serving your teacher. You actually learn more from serving your teacher than like classroom, even one-on-one learning. Why is that said? Is because when one is, and here when we serving means assisting. We use the word assisting. That if you're only getting like Torah learning, which is obviously that's why you're connected to your teacher, but to watch your teacher in real action is where the real learning comes. To see the midot of your teacher, the personality characteristics of your teacher. And so that is explained here. It says he served God, but he served Eli. And so when you serve your teacher, it's like serving God. It's like serving God, which is a very, very deep understanding. Okay, then now we're going to like switch gears here. The 12th verse introduces a whole new energy that we're going to follow now, where it says that the sons of Eli were actually quite evil, and they did not know God. Now we're going to see what happens with this. But what's interesting is that here in the book of Shmuel, the sons of Eli are called Bnei Bilial, which is a term meaning very negative, very evil. And if you remember, and I mentioned it back then, is when Chana is praying her heart out, and Eli sees this woman who seems to be mumbling and, acting very intense, thought she was drunk. And he accuses her of being drunk. And she says to him, "Don't count me among the Bnei Belial. Don't count me among evil people." And one of the commentaries said that this was somewhat Ruach HaKodesh on the part of Chana, that she used this term, which is later attributed to the sons of Eli. And so she was like in somewhat prophetic sense saying, don't include me with your sons who have gone, what's called off the derech, off the righteous road. And then we're not going verse by verse. It explains that the sons of Eli, there's different opinions exactly what they were doing and exactly what was wrong. But the text is saying that when people would come and make their offerings, so in most cases, the Kohanim got part of the offering. The only offering that was completely burnt on the altar was called the Ola offering, the elevation offering. All the others, either the Kohanim had a part of the sacrifice, or the person bringing it had a part, or both the Kohanim and the person bringing it. That was the general principle. You have the one exception where it's all burnt up on the altar. And so the Kohanim got their part of the animal. And that is what they would eat. That was their part. Because remember, the Kohanim and the Levim, they weren't given a tract of land. The Levim had cities, but in those days, it was an agricultural society. And so they were dependent on tithing and the parts of the sacrifices. This is, we would call it part of, call it a welfare system where everyone is taken care of. This is how the Kohanim and the Levim were taken care of. But here it explains that the sons of Eli, they forced they forced the people to give them more than their real share was. That was their sin. And it explains it in some detail here. But that was their sin here. And that was considered a very big sin because apparently it was turning people off. People were very upset by this, that the Kohanim were just like forcing their position on everyone and taking more than their share. Then it goes back to, then it says, but Shmuel, he was serving God and he wore simple garments. So here, the story is contrasting Shmuel to the sons of Eli. And the commentaries point out that, and we see this in reality, and we see this throughout history, we would imagine that a righteous person that so-called automatically their children would also be righteous. But that's not how reality works. In other words, you could have very not so good parents, and the child turns out wonderful. Or you can have wonderful parents. I'm not even putting in religious terms here, just in general. You can have very moral and ethical parents, but somehow it doesn't get translated to the children. Either because peer pressure is too great, genetics, social upbringing, influences from society, whatever it is. So here, Shmuel is contrasted to the sons of Eli. Eli is the high priest. He's like the highest of the high. And yet his sons, right there, it's not like they like today, where children go very far away from their parents, maybe see them once a year. But here, it was in the Mishkan. Eli is there. And his influence does not reach his sons. Shmuel, his parents only see him, as we're going to see shortly, a few times a year. That's all he sees his parents. And yet, he is being raised in the most beautiful way. So this is a very contemporary, relevant idea. And we see through history in Judaism, many great rabbis in the present, in the past, their children didn't always follow their ways, without getting into it more than that. And then it says that every year, now we might have thought, and I already mentioned that this is not the case, that once Chana gave over Shmuel, maybe she never saw him again. But here, the next verse makes it clear that Chana would come up for these 3 pilgrimage holidays, and she would bring, here it says that she brought Shmuel clothing that he would wear. But we understand from this is that there was still a deep parental connection here. We shouldn't think otherwise. And when they would come up to the Mishkan, they didn't stay for a day or two. Pesach and Sukkot, they would stay the whole time. Shavuos, people also stayed, far longer than this, the one day of Shavuos. And so there was a deep connection between Chana and Shmuel, between Elkanah and Shmuel. And then in the 20th verse, so Eli now blesses Elkanah and Chana to have more children. He sees Shmuel as a shining light, and he now blesses them to have more children. And so in the 21st verse, it says, Ki pakad Hashem et Chana v'tahar v'telet shlosha banim. That God remembered Chana, and she became pregnant, and she gave birth to 3 more sons, ushte banot, and two daughters. V'yigdal anar Shmuel im Hashem. And Shmuel grew up with God. Now, we already learned that he was actually growing up with Eli. And that was the point we made before, is that there's a comparison here, that he's being brought up, as it were, with God, but it means with Eli. But there's a comparison here. This is a very good point to remember. One of the mitzvot in the Torah is to emulate God. And so in the Torah, in one place, God is compared to a consuming fire. And so the sages ask, how can we emulate God? And another mitzvah is to be davek, devekut, to cling to God. So the sages ask, how can we cling to God if he's a consuming fire? Like, how does that work? And the sages answer their own question, and they say, by being connected to Talmidei Chachamim, to be connected to the wise scholars. So here again, we have another comparison, that we have to emulate and cling to God, but it's not so easy to understand, well, how do we do that? By being close, learning from, clinging to, serving Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, now the story goes back to Eli and his sons. I'm going to go a little bit quicker here, is that Eli, it says that he became old, actually very old, and only here it says he heard about what his sons are doing. So of course this leads us to think, like, where was Eli all these years? What was he missing here? And it could be that his sons just hid it. It could be that everyone was afraid to tell Eli how not okay his sons were. Not clear why it waited till he was so old before he said anything. But here he finally gives rebuke to his sons. And he tells them, I'm hearing terrible things, and you're not doing properly, and you really need to be careful, because it's not just that you're sinning against the people that you're taking more than your share from, but this is actually a desecration of God's name, because it gave a bad name to the Kohanim. It gave a bad name to coming up to Shilo. And this was considered a desecration of God's name. So Eli says to them, if you do wrong to other people, you could be judged by other people. You could make restitution. But when you're sinning against God, like you're going to go to judgment with God. That was his way of trying to express the seriousness of what was happening here. Now, again, it contrasts Shmuel, goes back and forth between the sons of Eli and saying good things about Shmuel. And here it says that Shmuel continued to grow, and he was good, v'tov. Gam im Hashem v'gam im anashim. He was good with God, and he was good with people. So I just want to share with you that on Shabbos, I am learning, and I'm looking at the word Shmuel, and why I never caught this before. If you look at the word Shmuel, it has the word shalom with an aleph. In other words, the numerical value of shalom is 376. Shmuel is 377. But it's the same, the 4 letters of shalom are in Shmuel's name with an extra aleph. And so this can be applied to this verse where it says that Shmuel, in a certain way, found favor in God's eyes and in people's eyes. And this is connected to what it says in Pirkei Avot. It says in Pirkei Avot that if you find favor in people's eyes, you will find favor in God's eyes. But if you don't find favor in people's eyes, you will not find favor in God's eyes. But here in this verse, we see that Shmuel found favor in both. And what's explained is, we're going to see this, that Shmuel, one of the defining legacies is he would travel all over Israel and just bring Torah and peace and spirituality to everywhere he would go. That was like his mission, was to bring the goodness of God, the goodness of Torah, holiness, purity. And he would travel all over bringing this energy. For those who are following our Tuesday classes on the Baal Shem Tov, it's very, very similar to the Baal Shem Tov. He was traveling constantly, bringing goodness and light and love everywhere that he went. He didn't just sit and expect everyone to come to him. He went out to the people, and the people appreciated this and loved him for that. Okay, I'm going to finish up really give me 1 second. Yes, I'm going to finish up the 2nd chapter here in just a minute or two. So what happens now? It says, Vayavo ish Elohim el Eli. A man of God comes to Eli and tells him that what your sons have been doing is so wrong and is such a desecration of God's name that their seed, meaning your seed, is eventually going to be cut off, is going to be cursed. And he says, the sign to you will be that your 2 sons will die in the same day. And again, there's a lot of detail here, a lot of explanation, but he just says that your children's children, they will end up right from the song of Chana, when she said, those who are satisfied will end up begging for bread. That's exactly what the Ish Elokim, the man of God, says to him. Your descendants will end up begging for bread, and in the end, they're all going to be cursed and die out. And a lot of it was because not only did the sons do wrong, but Eli somehow was blind to it. He didn't address it until it was too late already. It was too late. Then the question is, who is this Ish Elokim? Who is this man of God who comes to Eli? So there's two opinions given, but the most likely one is a little bit surprising. Is it Elkanah? That's the majority opinion, that this man of God was Elkanah. And of course, Elkanah is very deeply connected with Eli, but Elkanah was a prophet. And so it's assumed that he came, and actually it says in the verse that he came with the word of God. It's not like Elkanah wanted this or didn't want it, but apparently God revealed to Elkanah that you need to go to Eli and you have to tell him what's going to be here. And so I just want to mention here that the sages tell us there are 10 people in the Tanakh who are called Ish HaElokim, a man of God. Who are they? Moshe. And again, it actually says explicitly that these 10, they were called a man of God. Moshe, Elkanah, right here. Shmuel, later will be called an Ish Elokim. David, Shmaya, he was a prophet. Edo, he was also a prophet. Eliyahu, Elijah. Elisha, the student of Elijah. Micha, one of the 12 minor prophets. And Amos, another one of the 12 minor prophets. They were all called in their books, they were all called a man of God, Ish Elokim. And so here we see that he comes with this prophecy, and that's really how the second chapter ends. And then the third chapter, we'll get to one of the most famous stories about Shmuel. And so I'm just whetting your appetite that we spent a lot of time on these first two chapters. We are going to go a little bit faster now. So before we end the class, I just want to mention again that our learning tonight is dedicated to Danit Herman's grandfather and her family, Yisrael ben Chaim Avram. He should have an Aliyat HaNeshama.